Chapter 2. After sipping the tea urged upon me by Mrs. Lane, I changed the dry knickerbockers and started off to deliver my notes to the village. "But the rain, the wet. Dick will take them," Mrs. Lane offered, wringing her hands in her apron again. Her grown son, she meant, who did odd jobs around the estate, while Reginald, the somewhat more intelligent collie dog, supervised him. Rather than telling Mrs. Lane I did not trust Dick with this important errand, I said, "I shall make some inquiries while I'm up there. I will take the bicycle." This was not some old, high-wheeled shaker, but the up-to-date dwarf bicycle with pneumatic tires, perfectly safe. Pedaling through the drizzle, I stopped for a moment at the lodge. Ferndale is small for a hall, really only a stone house with its chest puffed out, so to speak, but it must have a drive, a gate, and therefore a lodge. "Cooper," I asked the lodge-keeper, "would you open the gate for me? And by the way, do you happen to recall opening it for my mother yesterday?" To which, not quite masking his astonishment at such a question, he replied in the negative. At no time had Lady Eudora Holmes passed this way. After he had let me out, I paddled the short distance to Kindford village. At the post office, I sent my telegrams. Then I left off my note at the constabulary and spoke with the officer before I began my rounds. I stopped at the vicarage, the greengrocer's, the bakery, the confectionery, the butcher's shop, the fishmonger's, and so forth, inquiring after my mother as discreetly as I could. No one had seen her. The vicar's wife, among others, raised her eyebrows at me. I supposed it was because of my knickerbockers. For public cycling, you see, I should have been wearing rationals, bloomers covered by a waterproof skirt, or indeed any kind of skirt long enough to conceal my ankles. I knew my mother was criticized for failing properly to drape vulgar surfaces such as coal scuttles, the back of her piano, and me. Shocking child that I was. I never questioned my disgrace, for to do so would have been to broach matters of which a nice girl must remain ignorant. I had observed, however, that most married women disappeared into houses every year or two, emerging several months later with a new child, to the number of perhaps a dozen, until they either ceased or expired. My mother, by comparison, had produced only my two much older brothers. Somehow this prior restraint made my late arrival all the more shameful for a gentleman rationalist logician and his well-bred artistic wife. The eyebrow raisers bent their heads together and whispered as I pedalled around Kindford again, this time inquiring at the inn, the smithy, the tobacconist's, and the public house, places where nice females seldom set foot. I learned nothing. And despite my best smiles and by-the-way manner, I could almost hear a crescendo of excited gossip, conjecture, and rumor rising behind me as I returned to Ferndale Hall in an unhappy state of mind. "No one has seen her," I answered Mrs. Lane's mute, questioning glance, "who has any idea where she might be?" Again waving aside her offers of luncheon, although now it was nearly tea-time, I trudged upstairs to my mother's suite of rooms and stood outside the hallway door, considering. Mum kept her door locked. To spare Mrs. Lane the trouble, supposedly, for Lane and Mrs. Lane were the only house servants, Mum cleaned her rooms herself. She hardly ever allowed anyone to enter, but under the circumstances, I decided to go ahead. Laying my hand upon the doorknob, I fully expected I would have to hunt up Lane to get the key, but the knob turned in my grasp. The door opened, and I knew in that moment, if I had not known before, that everything had changed. Looking about me in the hush of my mother's sitting room, I felt rather more worshipful than if I were in a chapel. I had read father's logic books, you see, and Malthus and Darwin. Like my parents, I held rational and scientific views, but being in my mother's room made me feel as if I wanted to believe in something, the soul, perhaps, or the spirit. Mum had made this room a sanctuary of the artistic spirit. Panels of Japanese lotus-patterned silk dressed the windows, drawn back to let in the light upon slender furnishings, of maple wood carved to resemble bamboo, every different from the hulking dark mahogany in the parlor. Down there all the wood was varnished, heavily serged, draped the windows, and from the walls stared grim oil-paint portraits of ancestors. But here, in my mother's domain, the wood had been painted white, and on pastel walls hung 100 delicate watercolors. Mum's airy, lovely, detailed renditions of flowers, each picture no larger than a sheet of writing paper, lightly framed. For a moment I felt as if Mum were here in this room, and had been all this time. Would that it were so! Softly, as I might disturb her, I tiptoed into the next room, her studio, a plain room with bare windows for the sake of light, and a bare oak floor for the sake of cleaning. Scanning the easel, the tilted art table, the shelves of paper and supplies, I caught sight of a wooden box and frowned. Wherever Mum had gone, she had not taken her watercolour kit with her. But I had assumed. How very stupid of me. I should have looked here first. She had not gone out to study flowers at all. She had gone somewhere, somewhy. I simply did not know. And how had I ever thought I could find her myself? I was stupid, stupid, stupid. My steps heavy now, I walked through the next door, into Mum's bedroom, and halted, astonished for several reasons. First and foremost, the state of Mum's shining, modern brass bed, unmade. Every morning of my life, Mum had seen to it that I made my bed, and tidied my room immediately after breakfast. Surely she wouldn't leave her own bed, with linens thrown back, and pillowcases askew, and eider-down comforter sliding into the Persian carpet. Moreover, her clothes had not been properly put away. Her brown tweed walking suit had been most carelessly thrown over the top of the standing mirror. But if not her customary walking outfit, with its skirt that could be drawn up by strings, so that only petticoats needed get wet or soiled, yet let down at a moment's notice should a male appear in the horizon. If not this very practical, up-to-date garment for the country, then what had she worn? Parting the velvet drapes to admit light from the windows, I threw open the wardrobe doors, and stood trying to make sense of the jumble of clothing inside. Wool, worsted, muslin, coat, cotton, but also damask, silk, tulle, and velvet. Mum was, you see, very much a free thinker, a woman of character, a proponent of female suffrage and dress reform, including the soft, loose, aesthetic gowns advocated by Ruskin. But also, whether she liked it or not, she was a squire's widow with certain obligations. So there were walking costumes and rationals, but also formal visiting dresses, a low-necker dinner dress, an opera cloak, and a ball gown, the same rusty purple one Mum had worn for years. She did not care whether she was in fashion, nor did she throw away anything. There were the black widow's weeds she had worn for a year after my father's demise. There was a bronze-green habit left over from her fox-hunting days. There was her grey-capped pavement-sweeping suit for city wear. There were fur mantles, quilted satin jackets, paisley skirts, blouses upon blouses. I could not make out what garments might be missing from that bewilderment of mauve, maroon, grey-blue, lavender, olive, black, amber, and brown. Closing the wardrobe doors, I stood puzzled, looking about me. The entire room was in disarray. The two halves, or stays, of a closet, along with other unmentionables, lay in plain sight on the marble-topped washstand, and upon the dresser sat a peculiar object, like a cushion, but all of a poof, made of coils and clouds of white horsehair. I lifted this odd thing, rather springy to the touch, and made no sense of it. I carried it along with me on my way out to my mother's rooms. In the downstairs hallway, I encountered Lane polishing the woodwork. Showing him my find, I asked Lane, "What is this?" As a butler, he did his very best to remain expressionless, but he stammered slightly as he replied, "That is, uh, dress improver, Miss Enola." "Dress improver? But not for the front, surely. Therefore, it must be for the rear." "Oh." I held in my hands, in a public room in the hall, in the presence of a male, the unwhisperable bull that hid inside a gentlewoman's bustle, supporting its folds and draperies. "I beg your pardon," I exclaimed, feeling the heat of a blush rise in my face. "I had no idea. Never having worn a bustle, I had not seen such an item before. 1,000 apologies." But an urgent thought conquered my embarrassment. "Lane," I asked, "in what manner was my mother dressed when she left the house yesterday morning?" "It's difficult to recall, miss." "Was she carrying any sort of baggage or parcel?" "No, indeed, miss." "Not even a reticule or a handbag?" "No, miss." Mother seldom carried anything of the sort. "I think I would have noticed if she were." Was she by chance wearing a costume with a, um, the word bustle would be indelicate when speaking to a man. With a train? With tenure? Very unlike her, if so. But with memory dawning in his eyes, Lane nodded. I can't bring myself to mind her exact apparel, Miss Enola, but I do recall she wore her turkey black jacket, the kind of jacket that would accommodate a bustle, and her high-crowned grey hat. I knew that hat. Meant to be military in appearance, resembling an upside-down flower pot. It was sometimes, by the vulgar, called 3 stories in a basement. And she was carrying her walking umbrella. A long black implement meant to be used like a cane, as sturdy as a gentleman's stick. How odd that my mother should go out with a mannish umbrella, a mannish hat, yet swishing the most flirtatious feminine tail. A bustle.